The orc girl was too proud to beg. The human helped her without making her ask. The rain came sideways off the ridge, the kind that doesn't fall so much as materialize around you, cold and purposeful, like the mountain itself had decided you didn't belong there. Darrow was 11 years old and running late for his mother's dinner, and he saw the orc woman the moment he cleared the supply depot's awning. She was crouched in the road, trying to gather things from the mud: dried rations, a folded tarp, a small metal canteen that had rolled into the gutter's flow and was spinning lazily toward the drainage grate. Her pack had burst at one of the straps. She was getting it all back together with the focused silence of someone who refuses to acknowledge that anything has gone wrong. Darrow stopped. He had grown up on Relay Station Vethara, which sat at the junction of the Human Resupply Corridor and the Orcish Reach's Eastern Trade Road, and so he had grown up watching humans and orcs not quite look at each other. He knew the rules without being told them. You didn't stare. You didn't offer. You especially didn't walk up to a member of the Orcish warrior caste while she was doing something that looked like struggling, because to do so was to imply that she was struggling, and that was apparently one of the 17 ways a human could start an interspecies incident without meaning to. He knew all of this. He also watched the canteen spin toward the grate. He moved before he'd made a decision about it. 3 quick steps, a lunge, and he had the canteen in his hand. He didn't say anything. He didn't look at her directly. He just set it next to the other things she was gathering and then started picking up the rations that had scattered furthest, the ones she would have had to walk to get, and laid them back within her reach. She went very still. He kept moving. Tarp, a wrapped bundle that turned out to be a pair of training greaves, a waxed document pouch that had somehow stayed mostly dry. He set each thing down within arm's reach of where she was kneeling, and then stepped back under the awning and watched the rain without watching her. She finished packing in silence. She stood, shouldered what was left of the burst pack with both hands holding it together where the strap had failed, and walked away without speaking. He didn't expect anything. He was going to be late for dinner. He was almost around the corner when he heard a single sound behind him. Not a word. Just a very short, very flat exhale through the nose, the Orcish equivalent, he would later learn, of something between acknowledgement and a receipt signed under protest. He didn't turn around. He went home for dinner. His name, full version, was Darrow Van Isselkert, but nobody on Relay Station Vethara called him that. His father called him Darrow. His teacher, an exhausted man named Pelham who had been trying to retire for 11 years and kept getting contract extensions, called him Kurt. Get down from there. The Orcish kids in the Relay District called him nothing because they didn't call humans anything. They acknowledged human children the way water acknowledges stone, flowing around without stopping. He was fine with this. He had grown up in the world as it was. Vethara sat in the middle of a contested logistics zone. Not contested in the sense of active fighting. The Armistice Compact had been in effect for 18 years, and nobody was shooting at anybody, but contested in the sense that both the Human Sovereignty Coalition and the Orcish Reach had declared it strategically vital, and so both of them maintained a presence there, and neither of them particularly wanted the other to be comfortable. The Orcish garrison was in the northern quarter. The Human Coalition base was in the southern quarter. The rest of the station, several thousand civilians of mixed species living lives of studied mutual non-engagement, occupied the middle. Darrow lived in the middle with his mother, who worked logistics at the station's transit hub, and his father, who was always away on something he couldn't talk about. He had a small room with a window that looked out onto the relay corridor, and at night he could watch the supply convoys come through, human ones and Orcish ones, never quite at the same time, never quite using the same lanes. He collected route markers, coalition unit patches, an Orcish rank cord from one of the warrior caste members who had dropped it near the market and not come back for it, which he kept under his mattress because he was fairly sure having it counted as something he wasn't supposed to have. He wanted to see the world. He wanted to see the war everyone said wasn't happening anymore, but that felt, if you listened carefully at the relay station at night, like something holding its breath. He was 11 years old, and he hadn't found anything to be afraid of yet. Her name was Vethkara, and she was 26 years old, and she was here because she had been sent here. And she had been sent here because her commanding officer had run out of places to send someone who kept solving problems in ways that technically worked and professionally embarrassed everyone above her. The Orcish warrior caste had 9 tiers. She was 5th tier, which was respectable. She had made 5th tier at 23, which was unusual. She had made 5th tier and then immediately been involved in the incident at Crosspoint Davar, which she maintained had been tactically sound, and her commanding officer maintained had resulted in 3 diplomatic complaints and a bilateral review, and the truth was somewhere in the middle, which did not help her. Relay Station Vethara was a posting for people the Reach needed somewhere visible but out of the way. She understood this. She was not pleased about it. She had not been pleased about the rain, either, or about the strap on her pack that she had been meaning to replace for 2 months and had not replaced, or about the canteen rolling toward the grate, or about the human boy. She thought about the human boy on and off for 3 days. He had not made a thing of it. That was what caught in her mind and wouldn't let go. He hadn't hesitated visibly, hadn't made eye contact, hadn't spoken, hadn't done any of the things that would have required her to respond formally or to acknowledge that she needed help. He had just acted in that flat, practical way humans had, the way you'd move a stone that was in the road because it was in the road, and then stepped back out of it. She couldn't file that anywhere. Warrior caste doctrine on interactions with non-caste species was extensive, and she had memorized it at 12 years old. It covered acknowledgement protocols, engagement parameters, the 17 formal gestures of recognition, and what each of them committed you to. It did not cover what to do when a human child picked up your scattered rations in the rain and didn't make you acknowledge it. She ran the incident through the doctrine 3 times on the 3rd day and came to the conclusion that she had no formal response available, and so she had given the only response she had, which was the exhale, the flat recitunda protest, and she had walked away. On the 4th day she saw him again, at the market near the relay corridor junction, arguing with a vendor over the price of something she couldn't see. She kept walking. On the 5th day he was at the same market, and this time he saw her see him, and he nodded once, the way humans did, and then went back to looking at whatever the vendor had. Not a formal acknowledgement, not a greeting. Just recognition of the fact that they existed in the same space, which apparently was a thing humans did without attaching significance to it. She found this baffling and somewhat infuriating. She walked past. On the 6th day she came to the market and he was there, and he had apparently been arguing with the same vendor about the same thing for 6 days, because he was still doing it. And the vendor was still doing it back. And somehow money changed hands and the boy held up a small metal compass of some kind and looked at it the way a person looks at something they've won by being too stubborn to stop wanting it. She stopped without meaning to. He noticed. He held out the compass slightly, not offering it, just showing it in the same casual way he'd put the canteen down, and said, "It's Orcish. I think it's military. At least the case markings look like it." He looked at her and then at the compass, and there was no performance in it. He was just telling her what he had. She looked at the compass. The case markings were 4th tier supply core, relatively common, worth something if you were a collector. She said, "That's supply core." He looked at it again, "Not warrior caste." "No." Oh, he put it in his pocket, still cool. He went back to the next item on the vendor's table. She stood there for a moment longer than was explicable by any doctrine she knew, and then she continued walking, and she thought about it for the rest of the day, and concluded that she was going to have to find a way to avoid the market near the relay corridor junction. She did not avoid it. This was a decision she made with exactly the same level of awareness as the rain, which is to say she was aware of it in retrospect, when it had already happened. He was there the 7th day and the 8th, and by the 9th day they had established, without discussing it, a protocol that suited them both. He talked mostly, and she listened, occasionally correcting errors in whatever he had decided to believe about Orcish military equipment or doctrine, and he took the corrections with the unreasonable equanimity that characterized everything about him, and then told her what he'd decided to believe instead, which was usually only slightly less wrong than before, and she corrected that too. He had a collection. He kept it in a repurposed tin that had once held some kind of preserved food, and he brought it to the market on the days he came to meet her, and he showed her the items one at a time like a scholar presenting evidence. Route markers from convoys he'd observed. A coalition unit patch from a supply officer who'd lost it near the transit hub 3 years ago. The Orcish rank cord from under his mattress, which he produced with the expression of someone confessing to a minor crime. She looked at the rank cord. "How long have you had this?" she said. "Since I was 8, he said. "Is it a problem?" "It's a 4th-tier administrative cord. Whoever lost it has been reissued by now. So I can keep it." She considered several technically accurate responses and settled on silence, which he interpreted as yes, and which she chose not to correct. He had opinions about Orcish mobile units, which were wrong in specific and characteristic ways that indicated he'd been getting his information from the same set of popular histories that always got the details of the Reach's eastern operations muddled. She spent 20 minutes one afternoon correcting his understanding of the Davar advance, which she regretted immediately when she realized she'd been more detailed than was wise, because he looked up from the map he'd sketched on a scrap of paper and said, with the precision of a child who pays close attention, "You were there." "I'm familiar with the operation," she said. He looked at her. "That's not what I said," he said. She met his gaze. He held it, waiting, with the patience of a child who has learned that if you wait long enough, adults tell you things. "I was there," she said, "that's all." He nodded, filed it, and did not push. This was, she was beginning to understand, one of his more unusual qualities. He collected information the way he collected everything else, not to use it, not to leverage it, just to have the complete picture. Once he had a piece of the picture, he set it down and let it be part of what he knew without needing to do anything with it. He told her about his father, who was away on something classified, who sent letters that were heavily redacted and always said he was fine. He told her about his teacher Pelham, who had been trying to retire for 11 years. He told her about his friend Sarev, who was 14 and had somehow convinced every adult on Vethara that he was 16, and who had used this to get a job in the northern quarter that Darrow was extremely suspicious of. She did not tell him about Crosspoint Davar, not the formal version, not the file version, not any version. She told him small things instead. The weight of a standard warrior caste pack loaded for a 3-day patrol, the difference between 4th and 5th tier rank cords, the name of the Orcish seasonal festival that fell around the time of the human midwinter holidays, which was not about celebration, exactly, but about accounting, taking stock of what you had used and what remained, and deciding whether you had spent the year correctly. "That sounds depressing," he said. "It is clarifying," she said. "Those aren't mutually exclusive." She thought about that for longer than she expected. One afternoon, later than usual, he showed her the compass he'd bought, the Supply Corps 1, and said, "My father sent me a compass when I was 6, his first posting before the armistice. He said it was the most useful thing he owned." He turned it in his hand. His broke somewhere in the corridor approach to Meridian Station in the middle of a blackout, and he walked 3 kilometers in the wrong direction before he figured it out. He half smiled. He said it was the best navigation lesson he ever got. She looked at the compass in his hand. It was catching the light from the vendor's stalls, the warm late afternoon yellow of a relay station corridor on a clear day. My first posting, she said, without planning to. I dropped my pack tools on a mudslide in the Davar foothills and spent 4 hours rebuilding my kit from salvage. My commanding officer watched me do it and didn't say a word. Was that a lesson? It was whatever it was, she said. It prepared me for things. He looked at her. That's the most personal thing you've told me. She thought about this. Don't make something of it. I'm not, he said, and looked at the compass again. I'm just noting it for the record. She thought about his notebook and the fact that he noted everything, and found herself, unexpectedly, not minding. She had been sent to Relay Station Vethara for a reason beyond storage. She knew this the way she knew most things she was not told directly, by paying attention to what was around her and assembling the shape of it from the edges. There was a coalition facility in the southern quarter that appeared from the outside to be a transit maintenance depot. It had been there for 9 years. It processed very little transit maintenance work, as far as anyone could observe. The Orcish garrison had a surveillance rotation on it, which she was now part of, and the consensus among everyone she had spoken to was that the compact allowed the coalition to maintain it, and so it maintained it, and that was all there was to know. She was not convinced. The facility took unusual power draws on irregular schedules. The staff rotation was higher than you'd expect for maintenance work, and the staff themselves had the kind of casual physical discipline that she associated with people who'd trained somewhere serious. Twice in the 3 weeks since her arrival, she had observed cargo transfers at hours when the relay station's general traffic was light, and the cargo had moved with a care that suggested fragility or expense or both. She wrote this up for her commanding officer, Subcommander Areth, who was a man of considerable political experience and limited military imagination. He told her that the coalition facility was within compact parameters and that her job was surveillance rotation, not analysis. She wrote the analysis anyway, filed it with the garrison's intelligence officer, and was told by the intelligence officer that she had a gift for pattern recognition and possibly needed to redirect it towards something less likely to cause a bilateral review. She went back to her quarters and looked at the ceiling and thought about the facility and about Darrow, who was in no way connected to any of this, and who was somehow the only part of her life here that felt like it was proceeding in a direction she understood. On the 14th day, Sarev came to find her. He was 14, and he was trying to be 16, and he was not very successfully either. He had the kind of face that would eventually settle into something interesting but hadn't gotten there yet, and he walked with the studied casual energy of a person trying not to look like they were in a hurry, which meant he was absolutely in a hurry. Darrow says you know, he said. Know what? Sarev glanced around, then reached into his jacket and produced a small data chip. She did not take it. Where did you get that? The northern quarter, near the garrison fence. Someone dropped it. Someone? I didn't see who, but Darrow said it might be military and you'd know what kind. She looked at the chip without touching it. It was Orcish military encoding on the case stamp. She could see that from here. And the case color was wrong. Garrison-issue chips were standard gray, but this one had the faint blue tinting of coalition-adjacent manufacturing, which was used in certain co-issue items during joint operations during the war, and was now officially not produced anymore. Where exactly was it found? She said. Near the south fence of the garrison, right at the junction with the transit corridor. She looked at Sarev. Sarev had the grace to look slightly cornered. What were you doing at the junction with the transit corridor? I have a job. In the northern quarter. Parts of my job extend too. Give me the chip, she said. He gave her the chip. She did not show it to the intelligence officer. She sat with it in her quarters and thought about the power draws and the cargo transfers and the not-quite maintenance depot in the southern quarter. And she thought about what it meant that someone had dropped an Orcish chip with coalition-adjacent encoding at the junction of the garrison fence and the transit corridor. She thought about it for 6 hours. Then she went to find Darrow. He was at the window of his small room, watching the relay corridor, when she knocked. His mother answered, a tired woman with his same direct eyes who looked at Vethkara with the carefully neutral expression of someone who had lived on Vethara for a long time and had learned that carefully neutral was the safest register. "He's expecting someone?" she asked. "No," Vethkara said. "I need to talk to him about something." His mother studied her for a moment. Then she stepped back and said, "He's at the window." He turned when she came in and she saw on his face the thing she'd learned to read over the past 2 weeks, not surprise, exactly, but a recalibration. He updated quickly, for a human child. He looked at her face and understood that something was different about tonight. "What?" he said. "Your friend Sarev is going to get himself arrested," she said, "and possibly start something neither of us wants." She told him about the chip, not all of it, enough. He was quiet for longer than usual. Then he said, "The depot in the South Quarter." She looked at him. "I've been watching it," he said, with the complete unself-consciousness of a child reporting something they find interesting. "The cargo transfers, the power draws. I track the relay corridor traffic at night." He gestured at the window. "There are coalition technical personnel going in and out who aren't listed on the public staff rotation." She stared at him. "You've been—" "I track everything," he said. "I've got records going back to when we moved here. I was 7. I didn't have anything else to do." He looked at her with the patient attention of someone waiting to find out if this is good or bad. "Is that the kind of thing you'd want to know?" She thought about her intelligence officer and his gift for pattern recognition speech. "Yes," she said. "Okay," he said, and pulled a battered notebook from the shelf above his bed. The notebook was extraordinary. 3 years of relay corridor traffic, catalogued with the obsessive precision of a child who had wanted to understand the world he was living in and had no one to tell him what was important and what wasn't, and so had written down everything. Convoy schedules, personnel rotation patterns, power consumption spikes she had no way of getting independently, the times when things didn't match what they should have been. She read it in one sitting at his kitchen table, his mother having eventually gone to bed with the expression of someone who has decided that if this is going to happen, it's going to happen without her supervision. Darrow sat across from her and watched her read and didn't ask what she was thinking. When she finished, she set it down on the table. "You understand," she said carefully, "that if what I think this is turns out to be true, there will be people who are very upset that a human child in a residential building has better intelligence on this facility than the Orcish garrison. Will they be upset at me?" She thought about this honestly. "No, they'll be embarrassed, which is worse." He seemed to consider this satisfactory. "So what is it?" She told him what she thought it was. The Southern Depot had been running a coalition experimental unit for at least 3 years, possibly more, something that the compact technically permitted in maintenance facilities. She'd checked the exact language twice, but that was operating well outside the spirit of the agreement. The chip was a coordination marker, the kind used in joint operations, which meant someone in the Orcish garrison was either feeding them information or was being paid to look the other direction. "That's why they sent you here," Darrow said, not asking. "I think so. But not officially. Officially, I'm here because of Crosspoint Davar." He nodded, accepting this without asking about Crosspoint Davar, which was, she noticed, and noted, and set aside, the first time anyone had done that. "Sarev's going to keep poking at it," he said. "Yes. And if he pokes at the wrong part, they'll know the garrison has noticed. Or they'll think the garrison noticed and panic, and do something that can't be walked back. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "What do you need?" She looked at him. He looked back at her, waiting. She needed access to the transit corridor at the times when her garrison rotation didn't have her watching it. She needed a civilian who could move through the residential and market areas without drawing attention. She needed someone who had been watching this corridor for 3 years and could tell her the difference between normal variation and something new. She needed things that she had not asked for and that he was offering. She said, "I need someone to watch the south corridor between the 3rd and 5th relay towers from approximately the 16th hour to the 19th, on the days I give you. You write down everything you see, same as you've been doing." "That's it. That's it." He nodded, "Okay." "Darrow." "Yeah." "If anything about the pattern changes, if personnel come out they shouldn't, or the cargo is different, or—" She stopped. "Come find me directly, not through Sarev." "Okay," he said again, and she recognized in his tone the same flat practicality he'd had in the rain, when he'd picked up the canteen without making a thing of it. She gathered the notebook and handed it back to him. "I'll take notes," she said, "if you'll let me copy the relevant sections." "You can borrow it," he said. She looked at the notebook. "That's your record." "I can start a new one." She held the notebook and thought about the Orcish accounting festival, about taking stock of what you had used and what remained. Then she tucked it under her arm. "You'll get it back," she said. "I know," he said. What followed was 3 weeks that she would, years later, have significant difficulty explaining to anyone who wasn't there. It was not exciting, in the way that people mean when they say something is exciting. It was watching. It was a child with a notebook in a window and an orc warrior with very carefully managed garrison rotation schedules, and a boy named Sarev who was, to his credit, significantly better at not drawing attention to himself than she'd expected, once she'd explained what would happen if he drew attention to himself. There was a rhythm to it. Darrow watched the second relay tower from his window between the 16th and 19th hours, wrote what he saw, and passed it to her at the market the following morning in the form of a conversation about whatever he'd found on the vendor's table. The notebook passed hand to hand without ceremony. She reviewed his entries against her own garrison surveillance in the evenings, looking for the place where the 2 sets of observations failed to match, which was the place where something was being hidden. She watched him develop the habit of cross-referencing. He had 3 years of notes and a good instinct for what mattered, but he hadn't been looking for this specific thing, so there were sections where he'd noted things as routine that were, viewed against her files, not routine at all. She started leaving marks in the margins, not text, just small symbols, and he started asking her what they meant, and she started explaining, and by the end of the 2nd week, he had developed a working understanding of surveillance methodology that she thought would have gotten him at minimum a notation in a training assessment if anyone had been evaluating him. No one was evaluating him. He was 11 years old and he was sitting in a window watching a corridor because she'd asked him to and he had said okay. It was small things. Darrow had a habit of humming when he was concentrating. Not songs exactly, just a continuous absent note that varied without pattern, which she found inexplicably settling in the way that running water was settling. He didn't seem to know he was doing it. Twice she caught herself matching it, very quietly, at a different register and stopped, and he looked up and didn't say anything, which was the correct response. He had a way of sitting that suggested he was ready to move. Not tense, not martial, just available, like a tool left within reach rather than put away. She thought about this more than was professionally warranted. He told her once when they were going over his most recent entries about his father's letters, how they arrived with things crossed out, the censors, standard procedure, but how you could always tell from the shape of the remaining words what had been removed if you knew his father's way of writing. He always says, "I'm fine," and before whatever update he's giving. They cross out the update, but the end is always still there, so I know there's something. She understood then, something about the notebook. About 3 years of a child writing down everything, looking for the shapes left by what was missing. She didn't say this to him. She said, "Has there been an and recently?" He was quiet for a moment. The last 2 letters have been shorter. She said nothing. She wrote down what he'd told her about the transit corridor, and she said nothing, and he went back to humming, and neither of them mentioned it again. On the 15th evening, she arrived at his window watch earlier than usual. She had a reason for the early arrival, and it was operational, but she did not immediately give the operational reason, because when she came in he was already at the window, not writing, just watching, with an expression she had not seen on him before. Quiet in a different way than his usual quiet. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said, and then, "Some of my classmates were talking about the investigation. The South Depot. They think there's going to be a conflict." She sat down in the chair. "What do they think a conflict looks like?" "I don't know. They were excited about it." He paused. "They think it would be cool." She was quiet. "Have you," he stopped, started again. "Have you seen a conflict? Like an actual one, not the armistice situation?" "Yes." "What's it like?" She thought about what to say. She thought about the Davar advance and about Crosspoint Davar, and about what she could and couldn't tell an 11-year-old child whose father was in a classified posting and whose classmates thought conflict was cool. "It's mostly waiting," she said. "And then it's very fast, and then it's waiting again, but different." She looked at him. "The part people who haven't been there want to know about is not the part that stays with you." He held her gaze. He was quiet for a long time. "What part stays with you?" he said. She thought about a man she had known in the Reach's Eastern operations who had hummed to himself in exactly the same absent, variationless way Darrow did, and who was no longer alive, and who had deserved better from the situation than the situation had given him. "The parts where you knew people," she said. He turned back to the window. She let the silence be what it was. After a while he said, "I'm going to write it down, what you said." He didn't look at her. "Is that all right?" "Yes," she said. He wrote it down. She said, "Has there been an and recently?" He was quiet for a moment. The last 2 letters have been shorter. She said nothing. She wrote down what he'd told her about the transit corridor, and she said nothing, and he went back to humming, and neither of them mentioned it again. On the 19th day, the pattern changed. Not explosively, not in the way of confrontations or alarms. The South Depot took a power draw at the second hour of the night, when it had never before taken power in the second hour, and Darrow was not supposed to be awake at the second hour but was, because he'd gone to sleep early and woken from a dream he didn't describe. He wrote it down. He came to her at the 7th hour with the entry already noted and the time marked. She looked at it and felt something in her chest that was not quite dread and was not quite certainty, but was the place where the two of them met. "When did the last coalition technical rotation change?" she said. 6 days ago, Darrow said. "I noted it here," he pointed. She had missed it because it had been a gradual change. 2 new faces replacing 2 old ones over 3 days, which was within normal variation. She had not noticed it as a pattern. He had, because he had 3 years of baselines. She filed the full report that morning, not to the intelligence officer this time. To her commanding officer, Subcommander Arath, with a copy she sent herself and held separately, and with the addendum, written with the precision of someone who has been in trouble before for doing things that technically worked and professionally embarrassed people, that the pattern had been identified with assistance from civilian observation, and that she was formally requesting an expansion of the garrison's surveillance rotation to cover the second-hour corridor window. Arith called her in. "This is the facility again," he said. "The report speaks for itself," she said. He looked at it, he looked at her. He was a man of considerable political experience and limited military imagination, and she watched him work through the political experience part of this, which took longer than the military imagination part would have. "The civilian source," he said. "Who is it?" "A relay station resident," she said. "Not affiliated with any military or intelligence structure, a private record keeper." He looked at her again. "I'm not going to formally sanction civilian intelligence sources," he said. "The report doesn't require you to. I'm the source of record. The civilian record merely confirmed observations I had already made." This was, technically, not a lie. She had made the observations. She had merely made them from his notebook rather than from her own files. Arith put the report down. He said, "You understand that if this goes forward and it turns out to be nothing." "It's not nothing," she said. He was quiet. "Expand the rotation," she said. "Let me run the second-hour window myself the next 3 nights. If nothing develops, I'll retract the analysis and write the counterargument myself." He looked at her for a long time. "Fine," he said. Something developed. On the second night, she was watching the south corridor at the second hour, in a position she'd chosen because Darrow had told her that the relay tower shadow at that hour covered exactly the section of corridor she needed, and no one from the depot would see her there. She saw 3 coalition technical personnel leave the facility with a container she had not seen enter it. She followed. She did not engage. She observed and recorded. The container went to a secondary location in the transit hub, a maintenance sublevel that was listed on no public inventory. She photographed what she could from the access point she had, and she returned to the garrison, and she wrote it up and sent it up the chain, past Arith this time, to the Reach's Regional Intelligence Directorate. The response came back in 14 hours. Expanded investigation authorized. Garrison jurisdiction expanded to include the transit hub maintenance sublevels. Subcommander Arith to coordinate with regional intelligence. 3rd-tier envoy to be dispatched within the week. She read the authorization 3 times. She thought about Crosspoint Davor, about being sent to Vithera, about the shape of what had been missing from the assignments, the way you could sometimes see what had been redacted if you knew the way something was written. She went to find Darrow. He was at the window when she arrived. He turned when she knocked on the door, and his mother, who by now simply stepped back when Vethkara appeared, stepped back. She told him what had happened, stripped of the classified details, the shape of it. He listened, then he said, "Is it done?" "The investigation is beginning. The active part for us is done." He nodded. He looked out the window at the relay corridor, at the towers and the convoys and the night traffic moving between zones that had been, technically, at peace for 18 years. "My father's last letter," he said. "It had an end at the end, like there was going to be more and then there wasn't." She sat down in the chair by the window, the one that had been pulled out over the past weeks and left pulled out, and she didn't say anything. "He's coalition signals," Darrow said. "He's been away for 6 months on a posting he can't talk about." He looked at her. "Is the thing you found in the South Depot connected to coalition signals operations?" She thought about this carefully. "I don't know," she said, honestly. "But it might be. There are many signals operations the coalition runs. The chances of any given one being connected to any given operative are. But it might be." She stopped. He looked at her. His face was not a child's face in that moment. It was the face of someone who had been looking at missing patterns for a long time and had just found one that mattered and was doing the math and did not like what the math was doing. "Yes," she said, "it might be." He turned back to the window. She sat with him while he sat with that. The relay corridor went on doing what it did, convoys and personnel and the quiet industry of a station that had been, for 18 years, holding its breath. After a long time he said, if he's connected to it, and the investigation goes forward. Operational connectivity doesn't necessarily mean culpability, she said. Intelligence operations are layered. People at certain levels don't always know the full shape of what they're part of. You know that's not always true. I know that. Yes. Another silence. What do you want me to say? She said. He shook his head a little. Nothing, he stopped. Then, I wanted someone to know I was thinking about it, that's all. She understood this better than she could have explained, which was why she was still sitting there. She stayed until he fell asleep in the chair, his head tipped to one shoulder, the notebook open on his lap at the last entry, the second-hour power draw that had started all of this. She closed it carefully, set it on the shelf above his bed where it lived, and let herself out. His mother was waiting in the corridor. She looked at Veth Kara for a moment. Then she said quietly, he doesn't have many people. I know, Veth Kara said. He doesn't know how to stop caring about things once he starts. I know, she said again. His mother looked at her for another moment, and then went back inside. Veth Kara stood in the corridor for a minute longer, thinking about the Orcish accounting festival, about what you had spent, and whether you had spent it correctly. Then she went back to the garrison. The Regional Intelligence Directorate's envoy arrived, and things became, as things in her experience tended to become when regional directorates arrived, simultaneously more structured and more uncertain. There were meetings she was excluded from, and meetings she was included in where she was asked to repeat, in careful language, what she had observed and when and through what methodology. She gave the same answers each time and did not mention Darrow, citing herself as the observing source throughout, which was permitted if you were willing to accept the methodological scrutiny, which she was. Subcommander Areth watched her do this, with an expression that suggested he understood more than she'd given him credit for. The investigation moved forward. On the fourth day of the envoy's presence, Sarev appeared at the garrison's civilian receiving point and asked for Veth Kara specifically. She went out to meet him. He looked for the first time since she'd known him, actually his age. Darrow's father, he said. He's been detained, coalition military detention. They picked him up this morning. She felt the bottom of her stomach drop a measured distance, the way things did when you'd known something was possible and it became true. Where is Darrow? At school, he doesn't know yet. His mother just found out. She doesn't want to tell him at school. She looked at Sarev. Thank you for coming, she said. She went to find the envoy. She was not in a position to affect the investigation. She had known this from the moment the regional directorate arrived. She had good intelligence instincts and the kind of operational record that, from the right angle and the right light, looked excellent, and from the other direction looked like Crosspoint Davar. She was 5th tier. She had been sent to Vethara as storage. She knew all of this. She also knew the structure of the coalition signals network she'd been studying for the past several weeks, considerably better than anyone else in the regional investigation, because she had 3 years of Darrow's notebooks and a month of her own detailed observation on top of the garrison's files. She requested a formal inclusion in the analysis phase of the investigation. The envoy, a 7th-tier operational strategist named Orev Nast, who had the look of someone who had not slept in several days, listened to her formal request with the patience of a man who was dealing with 17 other things simultaneously. Then he said, Veth Kara, 5th tier, sent here from Crosspoint Davar. Yes. What happened at Crosspoint Davar? She told him the actual version. Not the version in her file, which was accurate but selective. The full version, with the decisions she'd made and why she'd made them and what had worked, and what had cost the 3 diplomatic complaints and the bilateral review. He listened without stopping her. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You were right," he said. "I know. And you made it impossible for anyone to act on the fact that you were right, because of how you did it." "Yes." He thought about this. "What do you want from inclusion in the analysis?" "I want access to the detainee's personnel file, the coalition operative." She paused. "I want to verify whether the signals operation he was attached to had full visibility of what the depot in the South Quarter was running. If he didn't have visibility, that's a material factor in how you assess his culpability." The envoy looked at her. "Detainee welfare is not typically an intelligence analyst's concern," he said. "It's not welfare," she said. "It's methodology. Culpability affects how you structure what comes next. If he's a full knowing participant, you approach the follow-on operation differently than if he's a partial visibility case." He thought about this. "You know the detainee's family," he said, not accusing, just saying. "His son lives here. His son has been," she stopped. "I know his son." "How old?" 11. The envoy looked at his desk. He looked at her. "I'll give you read access to the relevant files," he said. "Your analysis goes through me. You don't communicate findings to anyone outside this investigation." "Understood." "And Vethkara?" "Yes. Whatever you find, the investigation proceeds on its own grounds. I can't promise you the outcome." "I know," she said. "I'm not asking you to." The file told her what she'd hoped and partly feared. The signals operative, Darrow's father, a man named Selkurt, whose face in the personnel photograph looked like his son's face in 20 years, had been attached to the Coalition's Regional Relay Monitoring Program, which was a legitimate compact sanction operation. He had been forwarded technical coordination packages as part of his assignment. Those packages had contained, embedded in routine data, operational parameters for the South Depot facility. He had not known this. The methodology was documented. It was a technique the Coalition's Technical Operations Division had been using in the corridor for at least 4 years, using legitimate relay monitoring personnel as unwitting data carriers. He'd been feeding the South Depot information without knowing what he was feeding them. She wrote the analysis in 4 hours, documented it meticulously, cited every relevant precedent in the Reach's operational assessments, and filed it with the envoy. He read it in her presence. He said, "If this holds up." "It will hold up." The detainee's culpability classification changes significantly. "Yes." He looked at her. "You've been doing this for a month." "I had good source material." He considered her for a long moment. Then he said, "When this is concluded, I'm putting a formal note in your file from this investigation. I want you to know that before you hear about it from someone else." She didn't say anything for a moment. "Thank you," she said, which was not something she said often. Darrow found out that afternoon when his mother told him, in the kitchen, while Vethkara sat at the table across from him and didn't say anything, because there wasn't anything to say yet that would be more useful than being there. He was very still for a long time. Then he said, "He's not going to be home for the accounting season." "No," his mother said. "He might miss the next one too." His mother put her hand on his shoulder and didn't say anything. Darrow looked at the table. Vethkara watched him work through something that he was working through alone, the way she had, the way everyone who mattered eventually had to. She did not interrupt it. She sat with him in it, which was different. After a while he looked up at her. "Is there anything," he said, and stopped and started again. "Is there anything anyone can do, or is it just—" "There's a formal analysis in front of the investigation," she said carefully. "That concerns the question of how much someone at his level of the operation would have known about what it was being used for." He looked at her. She held his gaze. "That's all I can tell you right now," she said. He held her gaze for a moment longer. Then he nodded, once, the way he had at the market on the 5th day. The nod that was just recognition of the fact that something existed and he'd seen it. He went back to looking at the table. His mother made tea, the way mothers make tea, because it is something to do that is also a form of care, and set a cup in front of each of them without being asked. The investigation concluded. The South Depot facility was shut down under a joint compact review, which was described in the official communications as a routine compliance audit, and which everyone on Relay Station, Vethara, understood to be nothing of the kind, because everyone on Relay Station, Vethara, had been living in the middle of things for long enough to read the shape of what was missing. Selkurt's culpability classification was amended. He was released from coalition military detention into administrative review, which meant he was not going home immediately but was also not going to a long-term facility. He would be questioned, assessed, processed, and eventually, the timeline was not given, returned to his family. Darrow received a letter from his father that had the shortest section of redactions he'd ever gotten. He showed it to Vethara at the kitchen table. She read it and handed it back, and he read it again, and the hum he made when he was concentrating was lower than usual, and after a while he folded the letter carefully and put it in the notebook on the shelf, in the section where he'd put the entries from the days of the active operation, like a record of something concluded. He didn't cry. She had not expected him to cry. He had the quality of a person who had been doing his emotional accounting in private for long enough that the overflow didn't come until later, when the crisis had resolved and the immediate demand had passed. She recognized this because she had the same quality, which she had always thought of as a function of warrior caste discipline, and which she was beginning to suspect was simply a thing people did when they had spent enough time being the one who watched and noted and did not interrupt. She had seen it once. She would not see it again, but she thought about it sometimes, the image of him in the relay corridor assembly at his school, the one she wasn't there for but that Sarev described to her later, where the station principal had spoken about the investigation and about the compact and about what peace required of the people who lived inside it. The principal had used the wrong words, Sarev said. Not wrong in what she meant exactly, but wrong in the way that adults used wrong words when they were trying to talk about things they didn't want to fully name. And Darrow had sat in the school assembly and listened to the wrong words land around what had actually happened, and he had wept, full and unmanaged and sudden, the way children wept when the thing that needed to break finally broke. His classmates, Sarev said, had mostly been confused. They had thought the investigation was exciting, and the classmates on either side of him had patted him on the back and offered him things, which was a human gesture she had come to understand as kindness of a particular kind, the offering of something when you don't know what to offer. And one of them had said something about the next time there was an operation like this it would be even bigger, which was the thing that humans said without knowing what they were saying, and which was the thing that had made Darrow weep harder. She heard this from Sarev, and she said nothing, and she thought about the accounting festival, and about what you spent and what it cost. The third-tier envoy Orevnast came to the garrison to complete his post-investigation briefings, and before he left he called Vethara in and told her formally that his note would be in her file within the week. Commendation for analytical work during the investigation, specifically citing the 3-year baseline assessment and the culpability reclassification. She said, "Thank you." He said, "What actually happened here?" She said, "I observed a pattern and reported it." He looked at her with the expression of a man who knows a thing and is accepting that he's not going to be told it directly. "Right," he said, "safe travels, Vethara." She thought about safe travels and about Vethara, and about the relay corridor at night. "Thank you," she said again, which was still not something she said often, but was becoming, she noted, slightly more frequent. The Orcish accounting festival came. It was not celebrated on Relay Station Vethara with any formality. The garrison observed it privately, each member in their own way. But Vethkara found herself at the market near the Relay Corridor Junction in the early morning of the festival's first day, because that was where she had developed the habit of being. Darrow was there. He was at the vendor's table looking at something. He had a new notebook under his arm, smaller than the one he'd lent her, which she'd returned with careful thanks and which now lived on his shelf next to the letter. He looked up when she arrived and said, "It's a coalition-made compass. I think this one actually is military." He showed her the case markings. She looked at them. "That signals core," she said. "Is that good?" She thought about a man whose face looked like his son's face in 20 years, about letters with shapes in the redactions, about the second-hour power draw that had been the edge of a thing that had needed to be found. "It's significant," she said. He looked at the compass for a moment. Then he bought it and put it in his pocket and looked at her with the direct, patient look that she had come to understand was simply how he looked at things he considered worth looking at. "For the accounting," he said. "What did you spend?" She thought about what you were supposed to ask on the festival day, about whether you had spent the year correctly. "A great deal," she said. "Was it worth it?" She considered Crosspoint Davar and the bilateral review and the assignments that had been storage, and the notebook on his shelf, and the letter folded inside it, and the envoy's commendation in her file, and the moment in the rain when she had been crouched in the road, and something had been put within her reach without requiring her to ask for it. "Yes," she said. He nodded, satisfied, and went to look at the next thing on the table. She stood at the market in the morning of the accounting festival and thought about what she had. Not what she had lost or spent or what remained in deficit, just what she had, right now, which was more than she'd had when she arrived, and different in kind, and harder to inventory than anything in any notebook she knew of. The relay corridor moved behind her, convoys in their lanes, the station breathing in its 18-year-held way, the world going on around two people standing at a market who had decided, without discussing it, that this was where they were. She stayed. A month later she received orders. The commendation had moved something in the Reach's assignment rotation. She was being transferred to a regional intelligence posting, full analysis function, significant upgrade from 5th-tier field rotation. She told Darrow at the window, the way she had told him other things, sitting in the chair that had been pulled out and left pulled out. He looked at the relay corridor for a while. Then he said, "That's good." "Yes." "Went 2 weeks." He nodded. He had the notebook open in his lap, and he was not writing in it, just holding it the way you hold something that anchors you to where you are. "I'll write down what happens after you go," he said, "in case you want to know." She looked at him. "In case I want to know," she said. "The pattern keeps going whether or not anyone's watching it," he said. "But if you ever want to know what's happened in the corridor, I'll have records." She understood then, something about what he was offering which was not small. He had been watching this corridor since he was 7 years old. He had filled notebooks with it. The records predated her arrival and would continue past her departure, which was a fact about the world and also, she thought, a fact about him, that the watching was not contingent on her, had never been contingent on anyone, but was its own thing that he did because the world was worth paying attention to. The offer was to share that. That was all. That was not a small thing. She said, "Then I'll read them, when you're ready to send them." He nodded. "Tell me what to address them to," he said, "at the new posting." She told him. He wrote it down in the margin of the current page, his handwriting precise and slightly cramped the way it always was, the way she had come to recognize the way you recognize the particular angle of afternoon light through a specific window. The relay corridor went on doing what it did. Somewhere to the south, The depot that was no longer a depot was being cleared and catalogued. Somewhere to the east, his father was being processed through administrative review, moving slowly toward home. Somewhere above the station, in the lanes that the compact had designated for through traffic, the war that had been over for 18 years continued not quite to be over, holding its breath in the dark between the stars. And in a small room at Relay Station Vethara, on the accounting day of the Orcish festival, an 11-year-old boy opened his notebook to a fresh page and wrote the date at the top, and started the next record. 2 weeks later, when she left, he was at the door of the building rather than the window, because she was leaving from the building and not from the corridor. He didn't say anything. She didn't say anything. He held out his hand in the human style and she took it, which was a formal human gesture of farewell that committed both parties to nothing and acknowledged everything, and she held it for a moment and then let go. She walked to the garrison. She did not look back, because she was warrior caste and she did not do things that suggested uncertainty. She noted very carefully for her own internal accounting that she wanted to. That, she decided, was a thing she had spent correctly. She walked into the garrison and through it and out the other side and into whatever came next, which would be different from this, and would be several things she did not yet know, and would not include a window in the relay corridor or a child who hummed when he was thinking, or a small kitchen table where someone always made tea without being asked. She added it to the accounting anyway. It was worth it, she decided. She had not had to ask. That in the end was the whole of it.